Tyson
Sorry, I thought I was recording. Now I'm recording.
Well, let's start again then. Keith, you're getting intro number 2. So Keith Wagner worked as a USDA food inspector at the Tyson Fresh Meats in Jocelyn, Illinois. We have James Jarvis, who worked for 10 years at the Tyson plant in Waterloo. And is Susana Chavez here?
Yeah, she's here.
Okay, yes, there you are. Who worked at a chicken slaughterhouse in Mexico. So thank you again so much to our panelists for joining. We deeply appreciate your time and in really addressing this important issue of human rights issues that are interwoven in how slaughterhouses function, and they have gone largely unnoticed by the media and not very much in the public discourse that we have when it comes to social justice. So this is a conversation that really does need to be had more and more, especially in our current climate in our conversations that we're having in reevaluating the food system. And it is, to be acknowledged that many animal rights activists do target individual slaughterhouse workers for abuses and vilify them, and even have them advocate for workers to be thrown in jail. But this only allows CEOs to just dust their hands off the problem, point, these workers as that one bad apple, and nothing to see here. Let's, proceed business as usual. But that just allows the greater problem to perpetuate, and there needs to be a bigger understanding of how slaughterhouse workers are in fact victims of these very same systems as well. And only recently, the Department of Labor had accused the Slaughterhouse Industrial Cleaning Company called Packers Sanitation Services of child labor abuses. And they were accused of employing at least 31 children on graveyard shifts in 3 states. And they were tasked with cleaning the kill floors, various machinery, and including, the machinery included meat and bone cutting saws and a grinding machine. So doesn't sound like equipment that any young child should be near or working with, working in your proximity to. And many of these children began these shifts as late as 11 p.m. and worked until 7 a.m., with some of them working 6 to 7 days a week. And at least 3 children suffered chemical burns as a result of working in the slaughterhouse. And this is according to that complaint. And in 2022, the world knows COVID hit. And during the pandemic, these slaughterhouses and meatpacking plants were major sources of the COVID-19 spread. And these facilities failed to account for the safety of these workers. And in fact, the Tyson managers at Waterloo even placed bets on how many workers would get sick. So this is just, I think, the tip of the iceberg of these human rights related issues that are inherent in the slaughterhouse industry. And thanks to folks who are on our panel today, we're going to learn more about how human rights violations and oppressing marginalized communities and profiting off of them and their labor, and often, the lack of their ability to take action within the system is perpetuated, and why we need to have more of these conversations in the mainstream. So without further ado, I will hand it over to Crystal and our panel members to take it away and educate the masses and really share these important stories.
Thank you so much, Sheree. That was a great introduction. So yeah, I'm just going to go down a list of questions and kind of pass it off to each of you to answer. The first question is, how did you get into this work and why did you decide to work there? And I'm going to put Susie on the spot first, Susana Chavez.
Yeah, thank you so much, Crystal, for having me here. Like, Shrija, that's your name? That's how you pronounce it?
It's Shreya, but it's fine. You can call me
Yeah,
whatever.
you mentioned before, like we had to talk more about this.
Mhm.
I think that if we would talk more about this, maybe I wouldn't even be able to like say, yeah, I was working in these places because I wouldn't know. But yeah, the question is like how I ended up working there. Well, I ended up working there just because of a friend invited me to work there. I was 15 at the time, and I thought it was very cool, to go to school, being a student, and have a job. And sadly, like many of us, we still don't know what is exactly happening in these places. We had the idea that it's another job, because all our family, our culture, teachers, aunties, uncles, they don't see this as an issue. They see it like, oh yeah, this person is getting a job, is responsible, but there is a lot behind all these things, And like I say, I ended up there because a friend invited me. And you mentioned too, like many of these cases that were recently found, they start working late at night. I used to start working at 3 in the morning, and I will finish like around 7, and I will have to go take a shower and get ready to go to school. So it was now that I look at it, it was very a scary situation because there was a truck that would come to my house and just pick me up at 3 in the morning and take me to some place that I'm gonna be working. And I didn't even know the people, I just knew my friend. And I stayed there working for like about a year. And the reason why I stayed working is because at the time I didn't know that what I was doing, it was not the right thing to do. And because, like I said before, I thought that it was a cool situation because I was a student, I was very young, and I was working, I was somehow helping my parents, with expenses in the house. So luckily I was just there for about a year, but yeah, it was a scary situation.
Awesome. Thank you so much. That's so fascinating. And I want to hear from Keith. How did you kind of get started in this work, and why did you choose it? Why did you decide to work there?
Yeah, I worked for the USDA at a Tyson plant. I also worked at a farmland plant, just another company, and the farmland plant is where I started. I was just looking on usajobs.gov, and I had family in other federal agency positions at the Arsenal, which is just like a civilian military base near where I grew up, and they recommended I get a government job just for better pay and better benefits. And I had a degree in biology, didn't really have experience just in the workplace yet at all. And it was one of the few jobs that was entry level and didn't require a lot of experience. So it was mostly just out of recommendation from family, and inexperience and being young and wanting, decent money and decent benefits.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. And James, same questions for you. How did you get involved in this sort of work?
I was a convicted felon, so I had very few options, so to speak. It paid well. I mean, I moved up to Waterloo to live with like my sister when I got out of lockup, and she said, "Here, they'll hire anybody.
Mhm.
Pass the test, and you're good." So,
Yeah,
option.
so it's like a last resort sort of thing.
Yeah.
And Joyce asked Susanna, what made the situation scary for you?
Well, the fact that I was going in a truck with guys, like males that I didn't even know, like super early in the morning, 3 in the morning, it's super dark, nobody's on the streets. Those moments were like, oh shit, where am I going? Like all I know is my friend who is a female as well. So what if these people is, like insane, like they're gonna turn into us, like those things, those situations make it scary.
Mhm.
Every single day, it was a different person picking us up. So those moments were like, yeah, it was a scary moment, especially like nobody's around. Like we don't really know. We knew where we're taking us, but we don't know if these people is gonna change their mind and just, like go lose their mind and take us somewhere else and do something else with us. And we were very young. I was myself 15 and my friend was 16 at the moment.
And
Wow.
was it normal to have, because if I heard you correctly, you said that you were also in school, right? So was it normal that your peers in school would also work in a slaughterhouse?
Yeah, this friend of mine, she was 16 and she was actually not going to school. Her situation was completely different. Like she was living in a very complicated situation with her parents. Like her parents were not supporting her as much as my parents did. I took the job mostly because I wanted to like have my own money. Like I don't have to ask my parents for the money, but her parents were like basically not supporting her because she dropped out from the school. So she had to look for her own money, especially because she was starting, dating people, and she moved out with some guy and she wanted to bring money as well. So it is really not normal. I think that for every situation is like a completely background, but I would say that most of us, we ended up in this position because we need it, because there is no other solution.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the next question is, what was your first day of work like there? And what was the culture like? Keith, can you go first?
Sure. Yeah. So I started in Monmouth, Illinois at Farmland, and that was it. I don't mean to generalize, but it felt very much like a boys' club where just, the sense of humor was at least a little misogynistic. It was very, come on, we all get it. It like the locker room talk. That just felt like the norm there. And I realized that can be, more or less acceptable if it's all done with like caring and understanding, but it just wasn't. It was very insensitive. A lot of jokes were made at the expense of either immigrants or women, or like it just exactly what you would expect. Even from the women, like the older women in the USDA were very much like, don't, I don't know how to tap dance around it. It was very crass and crude, and I was relatively young, so it was hard to speak up for myself. I definitely remember leaving day one and looking at the grass outside and thinking like, that is the most green grass I've ever seen. And it wasn't really until later when I was driving home that it dawned on me that all I had seen that day was just the color red. Like everything was red in this place. And so of course my eyes were just like flushed with green when I walked outside. But I still remember thinking like, I've never seen a green like that. It was so vibrant. It was just grass. It was just a very strange memory to think back on. So.
And Joyce asks, how many USDA inspectors are on the same shift as you?
At Farmland, there must have been, I want to say at any given point, there were like 8 of us out on the line, and it was divided symmetrically across sides. So you had like 4 people on one side and 4 people on another side, while 2 chains were, moving their way through the facility and just set up at different spots along the line. So I could be wrong. It might have been 10, but I know it was like an even amount because of that, aside from like the vet that was working.
Okay.
So,
and
yeah.
how long were your shifts?
It depended because on on Fridays they would just go until they were completely out of animals, and so they had the potential to have much longer shifts on Fridays. Like I think it ended around 3 p.m. most days, but on Fridays it was like you expected to probably be there much like an hour later, many times. There were a few weeks where it just went by like a normal shift, but and then at Tyson they had 2 shifts, And the first one was, I believe, they were, the first one was always like 8 hours, like a standard shift. The second one at Tyson, again, every night they went until it was completely done. So there were nights where you were off in an 8 hour, expected time period. There were other nights where it would go like 9 or 10 hours. And that was just normal because, it would go past midnight. Just they had to finish everything they had to process that night. So,
Wow, that's incredible, like long day. And Jay, I'll maybe go back and we can like ask you some more about like what your day was like, our mistakes made when, everybody's super tired and stuff, but I want to kind of get through everybody first. So James, what was your first day like there at the plant, and what is the culture like there?
I worked at a large plant. There was like 3,000 employees. So it was a little overwhelming for me. Honestly, my first day, I thought, I'm not going to make it 2 weeks here. I did not see myself staying there any longer than I had to. It was just quite the culture shock, I guess, because there's so many different languages and nationalities. I mean, it was just overwhelming at first for someone from a small town.
Yeah.
Growing. So yeah, I was just like, this is not for me at all. And then I ended up being there for 10 years.
Yeah, it's interesting, like how you get into a habit of like, okay, this is what I do. And what cultures and languages were there? I know, like, I think from Tyson Waterloo, like they said Myanmar,
Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Bosnia, Croatia, Serbia, some Russians. I mean, there was just anything you'd imagine. Honduras, Venezuela. I mean, it's any Central American country you can think. I mean, just a huge mixing pot of just.
Yeah. And did this company like outreach to these other countries to bring people over like for this work? How does that work?
I can't definitively say how they get these people, but it seems like whenever they need employees, a busload of people come. I know for sure, like the people from Myanmar, when they get off in California, Tyson has representatives there saying, hey, look, we've got jobs for you in Iowa. Come here. They'll pay your rent for a month. They'll help get you set up. And then here's this job. You can make money right away. And so a lot of them come that way, just straight from the immigration portals that they enter in. They just have recruiters.
Mm-hmm. I imagine for them, it must be pretty isolating because you don't have that many people who speak your language, and you're out in the middle of Iowa, and it's like, what are you supposed to do? There's nothing, people. Yeah.
And a lot of those people end up working double shifts every day just because there's nothing else for them to do except make money. And then they have money to send back home to their relatives or, whatever. But yeah, a lot of those people work a lot.
Wow. And Susie, what was your first, sorry, where were we on? What was
The first day of work.
first day of work like?
Yeah, well, first of all, it was scary because like I said before, like they just show up to my house, ring the bell at 3 a.m. And my friend told me the day before, you had to be ready because they would not wait for you. So I was ready and I had to go. And luckily this place wasn't that big, but we were killing between 700 and 800 animals in a period of like 3 hours.
Wow.
And for me, the first day, it was just like basically just meet up with the boss, and they told me this is what it's gonna be. This is what we're gonna pay you. We need you here from this day to this day. Do you agree? I'm like, okay. Everything was like so fast. Like basically, you show up and you had to be ready, and they just explain to you one or twice what is your position and what you're gonna be doing. My position, as soon as I got there, was a pillar, which means like they would have someone on the kill floor, and this someone will throw the animals down from a tube, and somebody else would like submerge the body of the animals in extremely hot water and then put it on the table, and I would have to like take care of the feathers, like clean the bodies from the feathers. And sometimes the bodies would be so hot because of the hot water. And sometimes my fingers, the fingertips would get like super burn, like burn, like you will not feel it no more. Because
Wow.
it will get like calluses on the on the fingertips. So, and then after that, I remember that after that, once you finish your shift, you have to go home, and they will not take you home. You will have to find your way to go home.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I will have to like catch a bus that would take me back home. And I remember that I was smelling like, dead bodies, and like a lot of the chickens, like they poo in the air and everything goes on your hair. So I was feeling like very shitty just because of the fact that everybody in the bus was looking at me like in an ugly way, like in a disgusting face, like, oh my God, like you stink. But yeah, it was terrible. But again, it was something that for me was experience, like as a young kid, 15, I'm like, well, this is gonna help me to be more responsible.
Mhm.
And yeah, but yeah, it was not like a great experience. It was like a shitty experience, just because of the looks, the faces on the people, and the scary situation, and you just have to like do what they tell you to do. Like you cannot say, but I cannot do it, or you have to teach me more. You're not allowed to do that. To just do it, and that's it. You have to catch up pretty fast.
Mhm. Yeah, wow. Must be like intense for somebody so young to do that at such a young age. And Keith, what animals did the places that you worked at a couple places, what
Yeah.
animals were killed there, and what methods did they use?
The farmland plant was all pork, it was all pigs, and the Tyson plant was all beef, it was all cows.
Okay.
And the farmland plant, they used a gas chamber, if I remember right. And the Tyson plant, they used, I think it was a combination of like electrical stun and then an air gun to, yeah, and I think that, yeah, that sounds right. So
And the gas chamber, especially, like, did you hear at all the pigs screaming when they would go down into the gas chamber?
yes, yep. That's another kind of like vivid memory where I was only back in that area once or twice the whole time I ever worked at that plant. And it was a gas chamber, and the pigs leading up to the area, they seemed to know what was like coming up for them. And it was really terrible. It was kind of it was day one. I remember like this was, I'm getting a tour of the facility, and the USDA supervisor that's walking me through everything is like, and there's the chamber, and I watch it descend down, and yeah, you hear the animals just like reeling back and screaming, and it was, at the time it wasn't as traumatic as it is now to think back on, just because you're so like desensitized and it's just so alien to see this. It looks like something out of a movie, but yeah, you definitely hear it, and for the most part see it. The other animals definitely can tell what's, I don't know if they know exactly what's going to happen, but they're clearly in fear for their lives. And they were also making the same screams, making the same noises.
With the gas chamber, did you ever notice any pigs leaving the gas chamber still alive?
I know, but probably because of the limited amount of time that I ever saw it. I only ever saw that area of the plant maybe twice in my whole time at that particular plant. But the plant that I worked at in Joslin, the Tyson plant, there was at least one incident of a cow surviving the process that would normally kill them and was loose on the floor of the plant. And so they had every worker go out into the hallway and just wait that time period out. But to think that, you know, there's no chance that an animal would survive that, well, they can. And I'm sure that that cow had no clue what was going on, was probably just frantic and, you know, panicked and fearful. And so,
Wow.
sorry, I don't mean to make that
No,
too
no,
graphic, but
this is super. I think it's really important that everybody hear exactly what it's like, especially like with the CO2 gas chambers. I'm thinking of like the videos that we watched in vet school and many vet students watch. It's kind of like, and the pigs go into the gas chamber and then they are anesthetized, and it's not like that. It's like they suffer and they scream for a period of time before they actually die. And all of the other pigs hear the screaming and the workers hear the screaming. And what is that like to day in and day out hear such screaming? So yeah, I mean, I just want to highlight that. James, what, I think you're a pig slaughter facility, right? What methods did they use there in your facility?
It was the stun gun to the head, and then they're immediately shackled upside down, and then their throats are cut. And then as they go along down the line, they're electrocuted a few times until they eventually to the scald tank, where they're basically underwater for like 10 minutes. So by then, theoretically.
So wait, this is a pig plant, but they did use like a captive bolt gun to the head for those. What years was this?
This would have been like 2001 to 2010.
Okay.
I think 2010. Yeah.
And with the captive bolt, did many of those like die right away? Were there any that, you know, felt it but weren't actually stunned?
Much like Keith, I was never in that particular like area, but maybe once. They kind of keep you in your department as much, because the less you see of the whole process, the more desensitized you are to the process. So as long as you're just focused on your particular assignment, then you don't really think about it as a brutal process, you know? So yeah, I just only saw it once, so I don't know. And like he said, I remember one time a pig got loose, and I don't know if it had been shot and got loose or got loose before that, but it was running around on the kill floor, and I was just like thinking, well, you should let that one go. Yeah.
All right.
And I'm sure they didn't, but I was rooting for him.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? I'm sure many other people were rooting for him too. Susie, you obviously, it was chickens that you killed, and what was that process like? How were they killed?
Well, the process was they used to cut something inside their throat with the scissors, but some people would use a knife. Like I mentioned before, I became a pillar the first day, but then like the first week, the person that was working on the kill floor got injured, and he couldn't work there no more. So my boss, for some reason, thought that I was gonna be a good person to be working on the kill floor. So they told me once, twice, show me how to do it. And I became the person on the kill floor. So I would use a knife just because it's faster that way. With the scissors, like you cut like the trachea and the throats, and it would take like a few seconds for them to die. And with the knife, it would be like super fast. But yeah, that was the process, and a knife for myself. Other people would rather use the scissors because it's less dangerous, because sometimes when you are placing the knife on their throats, they move very fast and you can actually cut your finger, you know, because you're holding the head with one hand and placing the knife. And at the moment that you pull it to make the cut, sometimes they will move very fast and they will go away from your hand, and you can cut your hand. So a lot of people use the scissors, but it will be miserable for them. It will take like a few seconds, and you can see them like just trying to go away, like jumping on the cones where you place them. And I didn't want to see that. Like I just wanted to like be fast and done like super fast. So I use a knife, and for that, using the knife, I actually got injured once. Like they move and the knife ended up in my shoulder. I don't even know how it happened, but it did happen. And I used to have a scar because of that.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Yeah.
And what's it like to like actually have to slice a throat? Like, what was it like to do that the first time? How long until you became like normalized to it?
Well, the second day it was like, I had to like make it feel like normal. And like I say, I didn't thought the same way that I'm thinking about animals this day. You know, back then was just a job. But it was very, I would say it was interesting because if you can see their eyes and you can like kind of make the connection there, you know, like you can feel the fear that they have in their eyes. And because there was a lot of light on the kill floor, they see you and they know exactly what you're about to do. Like sometimes I will try to catch them and they will just like get all crumble in the corner of one of the room. So most of the time I will turn on the light because that will give them a sense of like safety. Like, okay, you're gonna turn on the light because you had to go to sleep now. And I will catch them with the lights off because it will be easier for me to catch them and place them on the cones. With the light on, I'm pretty sure like they know, like animals know what they're doing, what we're doing to them, you know, like a lot of people say, you know, like they don't understand, they don't have feelings, like, but I'm pretty sure that we are all wrong. Like it's just like another dog, you know, like they know exactly what we're doing and what we're trying to like, if we're gonna hurt them or we're gonna like help them to get better. So it was really bad. It was really bad now that you know, I have all the information that I know now. And I look back, it's like, holy shit, I was on the wrong path, you know? But yeah, that
Yeah.
was my situation.
And like, we don't blame anybody for like participating in this. I myself in school, I killed mice as part of my pre-vet program, you know, because I thought that that's what I was supposed to do. And, you know, it's amazing how we just become like, we accept it because that's what our boss tells us to do. And this is what we're supposed to do. We, you know, and we're taught like, oh, we're putting food on the table, we're feeding America or feeding whatever country. So yeah, I mean, we just become normalized to this. And so the next question is, how did this work affect you mentally and physically? And we'll start with Keith.
Yeah, I wanted to, it's in the chat, but I wanted to correct myself because dominionmovement.com, they also pointed this out. The method of killing was not directly the gas chamber. The gas chamber for the pigs, as far as I know, was to knock them out, was to have them go unconscious, and then they would string them up and cut them. I think it was usually a throat cut, and they would drain the blood. And so I just wanted to, you know, in my mind, that's, you know, they might as well have died in the gas chamber, but, you know, that's just part of the process. Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No. I do think like many gas chambers now, it seems like they are in the gas long enough till they actually die. Maybe, you know, draining their blood ensures it, but many of them are dead. But I don't know if that's true of every slaughter plant. But anyway, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's I just wanted to mention that because that was like an important point. No, working there was very stressful. And I was in the USDA, which was like easy mode. You know, I was not a plant worker. I became friendly with and maybe even friends with a lot of the plant workers. You're working side by side with people every day, you know, and even though it is kind of an odd place to be, you try to make the best of it, but it is hot and wet and, you know, it's humid, it's physically uncomfortable. Right nearby you are like boiling hot baths of water to dip tools in, to clean things with. And then there's sharp objects all around you, like doesn't matter which direction you face, you need to be extremely careful. There were plenty of instances where workers cut themselves, and they weren't careless. These were very careful, smart people, and they cut themselves. USDA workers cut themselves. I had a coworker in the USDA that had to go to the hospital like immediately, had cut down to the bone in his hand. And it's not Upton Sinclair, it's 2016, and it's, Jocelyn, Illinois. You think it's a very modern place, and yet when you're in there, there's a lot of like metal sticking out from things. They rework the line, kind of, at least at the plants that I worked at. It wasn't like an official process. It was like someday you would just walk in and all of a sudden the line would be shaped differently because they've introduced some new mechanism or they've improved the process. But because of that, it was very ad hoc, and like, things would be sticking out, or there would be a corner that's suddenly different, and you're so used to the same route every day, just walk, your body becomes trained to it, that when it was different, it would often, throw you off, or someone would like trip or something. And then that's not even to mention just like kind of disgusting things that people don't see on a daily basis, the tons of blood and abscess and vomit and hair. And I think Susanna, you had said you smell pretty bad, like even after showering, even it just stays in your clothes, and then on top of that, James mentioned a lot of the workers are working double shifts or many, multiple shifts a day. And that was also true for the USDA workers, but far and away, the plant workers were almost always working double shifts. And so you had mentioned earlier, people are tired, people are making mistakes, so the night shift was almost always like more dangerous because of that. You had so many people that were like working, 16 hours a day or more. And so of course, yeah, they're tired and, kind of not in the best state of mind to be using sharp knives and around boiling water and steam just everywhere. It is very strange. It's like being inside of a machine, and it just feels like at any moment, if you're not looking at the right spot, you're going to get hit by a carcass or hit by a piece of metal. So at least that was my experience. It just felt very tumultuous the whole time.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it is the most dangerous profession in the United States. And would you see like injuries happen on a daily basis? How often would you see that?
Yes, whether or not I was seeing them, like the people you've come to know, you just know, oh, like someone's not at their usual spot. I wonder what happened. And it turns out they cut themselves, or during the night shift that, they also worked yesterday, even though you're working day shift, they tripped, or I think there was even an electrocution that was a fatal electrocution just earlier this year, even at I think at the Jocelyn plant. So I will fact check that, but I'm fairly certain I was reading that just in kind of reviewing old information. But yeah, it was not a fun place to work at. There was always something like, in the back of your mind, any given day, you're expecting someone to be injured. And they also had a lot of injured workers working. And I was told, so I hate to just like fabricate a story, but I'm told that a lot of times they do that to avoid having to pay out like workers' compensation or, sick time, is they would just have them on light duty, cleaning or doing something that was less intense. So they were not likely to hurt themselves again while they're recovering, but they would just be walking around picking up, trash or cleaning. And it was just odd. Aren't you normally at this spot? Well, yeah, but I cut my hand and they don't want to send me home. So I'm doing this.
Yeah, like when an injury does happen, what is the process? Like, where do they go to? Is there like a doctor or a nurse there who deals with it, or do they go to an urgent care? Is maybe that urgent care have the interest of the plant in mind versus the interest of the worker? Do you have any feel for that?
I don't. I wish I had more information. I don't know enough about where the workers had to turn to, because I'm sure that if it was someone within the company, like a physician or whatever that was just on site, yeah, I would imagine they probably have the company in their, the company's interests first and foremost, and would probably have leniency towards the company, not, send people home, not send them to urgent care. I'm speculating somewhat, but this is just based on what I saw. Many people were working while injured or sick.
Yeah. And James, I know you probably have some stories. How did this work affect you mentally and physically, and other people that you saw?
Okay, well, I can elaborate more on what Keith alluded to. Because I did have work injuries. So I spent a lot of time in health services, which with the plant I worked in was large. So they had nurses on staff at all time. And so being injured, I was in there and saw other injured people come in a lot. And I got to be friendly with the nurses, and they would share stories and stuff like that. And so I've seen a lot of injuries. But yeah, but like Keith said, it was not uncommon for people to get serious cuts down to the bone. I mean, because these knives are sharp. Bone saws. Ironically, there was a saw there called the Jarvis saw, which was just a huge bone cutting saw. I mean, these things were lethal. And so, yeah. And like he said, there was so many injured people there being forced to work because, we're not going to take you, we're not going to send you home. We'll just set you over here and do something light duty, they called it. And so, I've seen people with some serious injuries not get treated properly, in my opinion.
Wow.
And for me, I had a back injury. And so I got put on light duty for a while, which could be anything from just sitting in a chair in a hallway, making sure nobody opened a certain door, just weird things like that. And then I ended up getting tendonitis in my elbow. And so that was a whole nother process.
And are these work-related injuries that you had?
Yes. Oh, okay. Yeah. And so, so first of all, if you get, you're supposed to report any injury, no matter how small. Well, they don't want to hear about your small injuries. They don't want to hear about the big ones. And so like you go down there and then they assess you. A nurse assesses you. They're like, okay, well, we'll put you on light duty for a while. And then if that doesn't make it better, well, then we'll try this. And then eventually they're forced to send you to the work comp doctor, which I don't even know how these people get called doctors sometimes, because they're just, like you said, they're working for the company, not you. And so I ended up having to have all kinds of procedures into my back. I had surgery on both of my elbows due to tendonitis. So I went through a whole bunch of that process with the work comp and just dragging on and on and on. And they do the very minimum to help you up until they have to do the maximum. Does that make sense? So you get very little care until they realize, okay, you really are hurt. Now we have to do something, which ends up being surgery most of the time. But by then, a lot of people will quit because they'll get tired of jumping through hoops. And so they'll just say, okay, I'm done, I'll quit. And so most people don't get to the point where I was, where it's like, no, you're going to fix me.
Yeah. So like people leave with these injuries that aren't treated.
Right. And so who knows how it affects them later on in life.
Yeah. And that changed, you were put in different roles. So like what were your various jobs when you worked there?
Okay. So I started out working in like packaging. So I saw very little that didn't look like basically the meat section of a grocery store. I was vacuum sealing pork loins in a plastic bags to be shipped overseas. So I didn't see anything really disturbing for the first like 5 years I worked there, until I started getting hurt. I started getting all these injuries. And so then they moved me over to the kill floor, working in an area very similar to where Keith worked. I would have worked with USDA people like him there. So, but my job there was to find contamination before the USDA did, because the USDA shut down the line. And if I found it first and had someone take care of it, then the line kept moving. And as long as that line's moving, they're making money. But when that line stops, they're not making money anymore. So
how would you like find contamination? Like, what would that look like? And then what would you do about it?
well, I would have to like physically examine every carcass that went by. These carcasses have been gutted. And so now I'm looking to see if there's any fecal matter, if there's any abscess, if there's any excessive hair left, if vomit, things of that nature. And then there'd be a person working with me who would cut it off or remove the contaminated slice with the really sharp knife and the bone saws. And so, yeah. And the scalding hot water tanks that Keith mentioned.
Interesting. So Susie, same question. How did this work affect you mentally or physically?
Well, I would say it will affect me physically, but not in a very visible way. The only visible thing that I have is the scar on my shoulder, from the knife, on my elbow, I'm sorry, on my elbow. That's the only scar that I have. But I would say I would get very tired, obviously, because I wake up at 2 something to get ready, and then just right after my shift, I had to shower and go to school. So definitely it will definitely bother me to be tired all the time. And mentally, it was disturbing because somehow I knew that everything that was happening there, it was like, somehow it was wrong, like when the person on the key floor got injured, like the only thing that they did was to like put a couple of bandages and say, okay, you just have to go home, rest and come back in 2 days. You're gonna be fine. And I was like, this is just not okay, And that's how I think that it was just emotionally like, it put me in a lot of conflict with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Like at the age of 15, you don't really have the knowledge or the power in my situation to like stand up and say, you know what, this is wrong. You're doing something wrong. Especially because we are teached to like listen to grown-up people, to authorities. So you can actually just have to like take it as it is, because it's someone that is an authority, or is your boss or your parents that are saying for you to do it. So you had to do it. So it was a very conflicted time for me. Like I knew that there was something wrong, but at the same time, I cannot say absolutely nothing because I'm just a child.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can imagine like just having to like see that, the noise, the everything day in and day out, it would, and I see this too, like just in my job with animals, there's this like tendency, if you're like very, very busy, you get like a little bit more aggressive in the way that you interact. Like, did you see that with your coworkers? Did you see that aggression? That lack of compassion kind of spills over to humans too. Like just that I don't, this person was injured. I don't care. Do you guys have any comments on that sort of vibe? What you're feeling? Anybody can jump in.
Yeah, I want to mention that in my situation, it was not like a huge slaughterhouse, like James and Keith, but it was just like 9 people working, and there was this only one person. I'm from Mexico City, so I was working in Mexico City, but there was one person that didn't speak Spanish. They were from another location, another place, so it was a constant abuse towards him because he didn't understand the language, and because he didn't have family in Mexico City to support him. So my bosses will always like make him do everything that nobody wanted to do. They will always use him just because of the fact that he didn't have the support or friends, And I will see sometimes he will get very upset and grab chickens and just like throw them from one side to the other side of the room because he was angry, he was frustrated because he has to work so many hours more than anybody else, and he was not getting enough pay. The boss actually allowed him, and I say allow him, quote unquote, to live in a place there in the slaughterhouse just for him to stay there at all times. So when the boss needed something, he will do the job. So it's just like, it's very sad, these situations, like he will always be frustrated and angry to everything. And I mean, I felt terrible going on the bus, smelling. This person will always be using the same clothes. I don't know how the bus found him, but his situation was really, really bad.
Yeah. And few other options. Yeah. I just, even me, like looking at slaughterhouse footage and stuff, I feel like the secondary trauma effects of it, just watching videos of it. And I get very short with people, and I don't even realize like, oh, I had to sit down and watch all these videos and write up this thing. And now I'm like very short and irritated with everybody. Keith, James, did you get any sense of that?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of going back to what I led off with, which was the like boys club mentality. That same kind of culture, they very much valued like toughing it out and being very, stern and tough and manly. And if you had an issue, it was sort of understood that it had better been a very real, serious issue. Otherwise, just dismiss it. There's no, we all work here. We all understand what this place is. So why are you complaining? Why? And that carried over into, the turmoil between employees and management, not within the USDA as much. Like, I think because I applaud James and Susie because I feel like I had it easy relative to their experience. I was like kind of removed from actually working for the plant, that was also known as just like, oh, the USDA is here to oversee things, but they're not really engaging in all of these, terrible, gross things. But yeah, the culture was still there of, kind of dismissing anything that you found, unacceptable because, hey, this is a hard job. It's a tough job. And if you can't do it, then get out. You don't belong here. And the people that dealt with the animals leading up to be killed were very cruel to them. And I think it goes back to what James said. They never wanted that line to stop. They wanted everything to keep moving. And so if a cow wasn't moving, they were beating that cow until it started moving. And if it was clear that it was injured, it didn't really matter. They were going to just beat the hell out of that animal until it would move. And not to the same extent, but the same was kind of true for the employees. It was like, you're not doing your job, you're out, or you're going to be, yelled at in front of everyone and disrespected and belittled. And yeah, and I, unfortunately, it probably was like multiplied if they were not speaking English as their first language. It all kind of spilled down, and everyone was disrespectful to everyone, at least to some extent. There was just a lot of like aggression and frustration across the board. It was that type of place. No one was really happy to be there ever.
Wow. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
James.
Keith said, he mentioned, from the top all the way down. I mean, even the supervisors were being yelled at by their supervisors. And I mean, it was just a constant, keep that line moving at whatever cost. And like I said, I can remember like the last 5 years I was there, I probably had 12 different supervisors because the pressure on them was so intense as well. And they took that out on the employees. And like I said, from the top down to the bottom. And I work in that Waterloo plant that the lady mentioned where the management was betting on how many people would get COVID. I actually know some of those guys from the time I worked there. And yeah, that's how they treat the employees. They're just a commodity because for the most part, most people don't work there very long unless they absolutely, so there's a high turnover. So they don't see them as people as much as a cog to keep the line moving because it can just be easily replaced. And so they're not human to these people, to the higher ups. They don't see them as human beings. They're just a means to an end. And yeah, like it's just stress from the top all the way down to the bottom constantly.
Wow. Yeah. The humans are subhuman. The animals are objects. I mean, it just. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so people say, well, I've heard this before, like I've talked about this issue and online, people will say, if they don't like the job, why not get another one? There's plenty of jobs out there. And these companies are providing jobs. This is a huge reason why these various governments don't want to stop the construction of slaughterhouses. They don't want to stop the expansion of slaughterhouses. The Biden administration is giving all of this money to allow more slaughterhouses to be built. They're providing jobs. So what do you say when people say things like that? Keith, I'll let you go first.
Sure. I know that, someone asked this in chat as well, like what was the percentage of immigrant workers to just like citizen, US citizens that were employees. And I cannot imagine that it was less than 50% like immigrant workers. And I, like James, I don't know exactly how every single immigrant worker was, had started at Tyson or at Farmland. But from my understanding, a lot of it was like placement agencies that would help them travel here from wherever they were from. And yeah, they would incentivize, they'll pay for the first month of rent, things like that. And I don't think that they had many other options other than returning home or possibly facing, a return, like a forced return. Myself, and again, I feel so blessed because I was just a USDA employee. I was able to get out after 1 year. My parents begged me to stay in 1 full year so that I could put it on my resume and not feel bad about it and have a reference. But I wanted out a few months in.
Parents are the worst.
Yeah. And I was young, but I still I had the choice to leave. And I just don't think that's a luxury that most of their employees have, certainly not many of their employees. And I think James probably points to something like a lot of the other workers that were citizens had some sort of criminal history. And so it was like a readily available job that they might not otherwise have. The area that the plants were in, I can't say for sure about Monmouth, Illinois, but in the Quad Cities, which is like the metropolitan area that Jocelyn is very nearby, there's just been a lot of economic downturn. A lot of jobs have moved elsewhere. And so it was kind of one of the last few big employers that actually had benefits and decent pay. And so there's just not, the other opportunities in the area for people that aren't college educated or, have some specialty training. There are a lot of minimum wage jobs or, service jobs that, they probably have to work twice as hard at to make it anywhere. But I had the option, and it was just sort of pressure from family to stay, but I wanted out immediately. And the other people that worked there probably just didn't, couldn't afford to or didn't have the opportunity to. But I am positive that they would not choose to stay there. If you went and asked them if they had other options, they would jump at the chance to leave.
Yeah, absolutely. And Susie, what do you think? What do you say to people when they say, if you don't like the job, go get another one? And these companies are providing jobs.
It's so upsetting to hear that because nobody knows exactly the background of the person that is working there. It's terrible. Like myself, I was in my own country. I didn't have no issues finding another job, and I didn't even have to work there. but it was something that I wanted to do. But there is many, like this person that was from another place, they didn't have papers to be working in Mexico City. They didn't speak the language. They didn't have family to support them. They didn't have friends. They didn't even have like clothes or a place to sleep. So
Mm.
they have to work there. Like, it's not that they don't like it or they like it. It's that there is no other option for them. You know,
Mhm.
there is a lot of women that works in these places because they are single, because they had kids that they had to support, because that even if they ask the government for help, it's not enough. It's not enough, you know? Lots of these people, immigrants, people that work in these humongous slaughterhouses here in the United States, they don't have papers. And so they don't have other option, you know, or they don't have the level of education to find another job. Because even now McDonald's is asking you for college degree or something, you know, like it's really not that easy. So for me to hear that is like, how naive is this person to say something like that? Like, how dare you to say, well, if you don't like it, go get another job. Like, obviously, most of the people, we don't have the same privilege that other people have. You know, so it is upsetting. And that's why I've been working so hard, you know, creating videos. And I hear that so many times on my videos, like, well, you're a monster because you were killing these animals. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not a monster. Like, I didn't know. I didn't have the knowledge. And it was a very conflicted time for me. So I would definitely, I'm gonna keep doing this until like everybody gets in the same channel.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, it's so frustrating when animal rights activists like blame slaughterhouse workers or, call you guys murderers and everything. It's so damaging. And so, yeah, I really hope that we see less and less of that. But yes, I've been attacked for being a veterinarian, and lab workers are attacked for doing their work. And instead, we have to change these systems. We shouldn't be attacking the people who are victims of it. And James, what do you say to people when they say, like, just get another job, or, these companies are providing jobs?
Well, in my case, I was a convicted felon, so I had very little options. And then I started getting these injuries, and I'm like, now I'm stuck here because who's going to hire a convicted felon with a work-related injury? So I felt trapped that way. And so, interesting enough, some of my Bosnian friends would say to me, like, why do you work here? You're intelligent, you speak good English, you're taking a job away from one of my friends by working here. And I'm like, I'm in the same boat you
Yeah.
find a different job either, unfortunately. So, until, like I said, I was there 10 years. And then my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, said, hey, I'm going to find you a better job. And so fortunately, she found a company that would take a risk on a convicted felon because I'd had a good work history for 10 years. And that's how I got out.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. And hopefully, like, with more like online work and things like that, hopefully there are more options we could plug people into too. That will be better and safer and things like that. So were you ever, I'm kind of wondering about what you heard about animal rights activists, if anything, in your job, or was your plant ever targeted by animal rights activists? Let's start with James. Like, did they ever warn you about animal rights activists? Like, don't talk to them, or, anybody soliciting you afterwards? It's okay if you don't have any examples, but.
Yeah, no, I don't think that was ever a problem. Where, shockingly, considering how big of an operation it was, you would think that someone at some point would have targeted it. I mean, maybe it wasn't something they did back then as much as they do now, but I don't remember there ever being that ever being a problem.
And Keith, what about you? Any experiences with that?
Yeah, fortunately I was only there for like one full calendar year. So it could have just been a lack of time or exposure, but yeah, both plants that I worked at never had any sort of disruption from animal rights activists or any like employees protesting or anything.
Interesting. And Susie, I imagine probably not a whole lot of exposure to them where you were.
No, not at all. There was never talking about animal rights, activists, absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, we're talking when I was 15 years, that's more than 20 plus years. So obviously there was not that this movement that we have now, you know?
And Susie, what do you think about, is slaughtering humane? Is there any way to make it humane?
I would think not. If somebody would say, there is a lot of people that say, oh, you know, killing it is not that bad. Like these chickens, like super fast. It's a humane way. There is no such thing as a humane killing. You know, there is no such thing as humane. Like they're gonna die. You know, you are taking the lives away from these animals that deserve to be happy and free and have their families and their friends. And there is just no humane way to kill an animal that obviously they don't want to die. If they run from you, you can see the fear in their eyes. It's obviously because they don't want to die. So there is no such thing as humane killing.
Yeah. And is it humane even for the humans involved in that too? James,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry. Go ahead.
No problem. James, what do you think? Is slaughter humane?
No, there's nothing humane about it. And I don't want to offend anyone, but I compare it to Nazi concentration camps. I mean, if that's humane, then yeah, humane slaughter's humane. You know what I mean? There's no, like she said, there's no humane way to kill someone or something that does not want to die. And so, I mean, it's just no. The answer is no.
And Keith, what do you think?
100% no. I'm with James. Like you get to see these animals instinctually reacting to what they clearly are aware of, which is that they are being marched towards their death, and they're not that dumb. You know, they're not quite as smart as humans, and you can't give them a pamphlet about what's to happen or what's about to happen. They just know. They hear their family members and friends dying up in front of them, and I just cannot imagine that they aren't aware. And that to me is, the fact that they are born and raised for this one purpose, and that's how they get sent out of this world, is just seeing their family members and friends and whatever, however you want to think of them, neighbors. That would be such an extremely, miserable way to die for any of us. And yet we do it daily by the billions, or by the millions at least, for these animals. So no, that's not humane at all, and not humane to the people either.
Susie, how did you view animals before you started this work versus how do you view animals now?
But before I didn't even view them as an animals, it was just food. But now obviously I became plant-based person and an activist. And obviously it's like animals want to live and they have feelings. Like even seeing my friends rescuing a baby chick and how they grow to follow my friend, they follow the person everywhere and they are happy when they see them and they want to be, cuddling with my friend, just like another dog, another cat. So I definitely give them so much respect, and I go up and beyond, trying to help every single animal, because everyone deserves to be free. Like the same thing that I want for any person, any human, I want it for the animals. Like I think that it's very unfair to say, oh, animals don't think, they don't have brain, or they don't feel pain, or God put them in this earth for us. I think that it's just extremely selfish to think that way. Like they have feelings, like they bleed, they feel pain. So definitely now I see them as a being, as someone, a sentient being that deserves to be respected and deserves the protection that we all need and want for each and everyone here.
James, what about you? How did you view animals before you started work versus how do you view animals now?
Well, I always considered myself an animal lover because I always had cats and dogs and hamsters and things like that. Not realizing that, there's these other animals but growing up in Iowa, which is like the epicenter of livestock production, you just become, almost desensitized to that's what they are, they're livestock. They're not really animals until, you work in a slaughterhouse or you start, going to like sanctuaries and stuff like that. And you start seeing these animals have, emotions, and they have friendships and they have bonds just like we do. And so it really was eye-opening for me, especially like the sanctuary aspect, is like seeing these animals basically having these human-like traits almost, and it just changed everything.
I wonder, like, is these like CEOs, like those in charge, is there any way we could, like, I always dream of like maybe doing some sort of all expense paid trip. They win a raffle and then we send them to like a sanctuary, like Iowa Farm Sanctuary. And we do this like meditation retreat, like yoga and the animals. And maybe they'll have like a change of heart and then they'll invest all their money into different investments and different modes of food production versus instead of animals. That's kind of my dream, my heal their childhood traumas and everything. Anyway, Keith, what do you think? How do you view animals now versus how did you used to view animals when you started this work?
I would say the same thing James said, that like, I think you hear this from a lot of people when the topic of being vegan or vegetarian comes up, that, they could never do it, even though they consider themselves an animal lover. And I feel like I would have said that same thing. I'm an animal lover, prior to joining the USDA. And I think only after having been through that and Iowa Farm Sanctuary, which, I'm wearing a hat, James is wearing a shirt of, shout out to them. Like, yeah, you really grow up, at least in the United States, and I'm sure it's similar most places in the world, just not even having to think about it. We don't even use the same words. You're not eating a cow, you're eating beef. You're not eating chicken, well, sometimes they say chicken, but it's poultry. It's, that we use different words for what we're doing, maybe in part to like obfuscate the terrible, nature of it. And I don't think I could go back. I have seen too many animals, walking up to me, smiling, not smiling like a human, but like clearly cheery and happy. I've seen animals at the sanctuary, pairing up and clearly having like best friendships. And I cannot view them any differently now. They're people. They're sentient, people. Maybe they're not humans, but they have as much personality. And I do feel like a strong sense of guilt for the, 25 odd years that I was participating. And I know that's probably not the best way to think of it, but it's true. It's like I was just engaging in the death of millions of like live sentient things, and it's very sad to think about.
Yeah, totally. I'm just going to go through some of the questions in the chat. Joyce asked, what kind of safety clothing or equipment were you given by management? Did you wear masks on your face? Did you have protective gloves? Susie, I'll start with you. I imagine you probably didn't have a whole lot. Any protective equipment, Susie, that you were given for your work? No, nothing.
There was literally just an apron given to me, just to cover my clothes from, getting dirty with the blood and the feathers. But that's basically it. No helmet, no goggles, no gloves, no nothing. Just an apron.
Wow. Yeah. And James, what about you?
The amount of protective equipment you were issued depended on where you worked. So yeah, I guess they had levels of danger. So, I mean, yeah, I worked in a showcase plant, so they took things a little more seriously, a little more close to the vest. I mean, I don't know what I'm trying to say here is, yeah, so things there were better than most slaughterhouses because they didn't have the eyes on them that we did at my plant. So there was more safety, there was more emphasis on safety. Now that doesn't mean people still didn't get hurt, but they did issue equipment. So
Okay, and what did that look like? What kind of equipment do you remember?
oh yeah, there'd be anything from like Kevlar gloves to like chainmail sleeves. Some people wore like chainmail vests, hard hats, ear protection, that kind of thing. Like I said, depending on what equipment you were using and were around, depended on how much. So like I've got very little protective equipment because I didn't work with those things, but the people around me did. So I could have been just as easily injured by the knives and the saws as they were. Even more so because I didn't wear the equipment they did. So in that sense, it was kind of, unsettling, but you keep your eyes open in your head on a swivel.
Yeah. Keith, what about you? What did you see? What kind of protective equipment did you see and use yourself?
Yeah, I know that for the USDA workers, we were given rubber boots, probably mostly to protect from like just moisture and having water in your socks all day, but maybe also to protect from like electrocution, just because the floors were almost always wet or had like puddles just in certain places. For the USDA, we had hard hats, and I think all the workers had hard hats too. And some of them had face masks, but usually only the ones that were using the like bone saws, just because it had there was a lot of like debris that would shoot out. And otherwise, yeah, almost everyone that was doing any sort of cutting had like either chainmail or otherwise mesh sort of protective glove underneath, and then would wear rubber gloves. Although I don't know that it was mandatory to wear the rubber gloves. There was at least one USDA agent that, and I'm just blown away looking back, but he never wore gloves, never wore protective like mesh or anything, and was very particular about his knives. So maybe he just had very good knife handling skills, but I look back and just think that was such a stupid move. Even though he was clearly like very had many years of experience and seniority, it was still just mind-boggling because you're right next to scalding hot water and sharp metal. And so I always thought that was just the worst possible decision to make. But yeah, I never saw him get injured while I was there, I guess.
Wow, so funny. I could think of so many like people who say like, yeah, I drive better when I'm drunk here, like because I'm paying more close attention, or I'm going to be more careful if I'm barefoot or whatever. Yeah. And then Joyce asks, the USDA is allowing unlimited speeds for processing pigs. How do you think that will impact workers? Keith, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I remember that at least certain spots, you had like 3 seconds to check the entire carcass of a pig for what James was alluding to, like feces or abscess or vomit or hair. And it was fast. Like day one, I thought I will never be able to handle this job. And everyone just said, it's okay. Like it feels like it slows down over time. You'll get used to it. But looking back, it was almost certainly not enough time to check for the things you needed to check for. And I know that by the end of my time there, I was probably a lot better at it. But those first couple months, I was probably missing plenty of stuff that went out the door. And there's just no two ways about it. I just did not have the experience. And even the people that had experience, 3 seconds is not very long to check the front and back of a pig's entire body for anything.
Yeah. Wow. 3 seconds. James, what about you? Do you think unlimited line speeds will affect and impact the workers?
It's going to lead to more injuries, more accidents. More, I mean,
Yeah.
that was the problem when I worked there, and that was 13 years ago now. I mean, this line speeds, if they have enough employees, they're going to crank it up as fast as they can go. And if they're going to keep cranking it up, I mean, I can only imagine, but they don't care. I mean, they'll find replacements for all those people who get hurt, because it's cheaper for them to pay their doctor bills than it is to slow down that line.
Wow. And
Yeah, that's how they, me, when I was getting hurt, is like, it's cheaper for us to pay for you to have surgery than it is to slow down that line.
that's something. And all you get those surgeries for just a 10-year career in the slaughter plant. Like you wait 3 surgeries for 10 years.
I had, both elbows repaired. I didn't actually have surgery on my back, but I had different procedures done to it. So yeah, they spent a lot of money repairing me or attempting to repair me when they could have just slowed the line down a little bit. And I wasn't the only one who had all these insurance. I mean, tons of people who were going to the doctors, but like I said, a lot of them didn't stick it out to get repaired. They just quit.
Yeah. Wow. And the next question is, like, was the workforce racially segregated in some way, especially Tyson Waterloo? I imagine it's such a huge place. Between or was there any differences between the management and the workers and how different groups were treated, racially or otherwise?
No, I think everybody was treated poorly.
Just all across the board.
Yeah. Yeah, because you would have supervisors of all races, and I mean, they weren't all, rich white men. I mean, whoever was brown nosing enough to get to the supervisor position and held on to it for a few weeks or months or whatever. I mean, I wouldn't say it was segregated at all. Everybody was equally miserable.
Yeah. Keith, what about you? What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. It was, if there was discrimination, it was like not very visible because it was just kind of wretched, like all the way down. There were certainly supervisors that clearly spoke the language of, whichever like worker was needing attention. I'm sure that wasn't the case for everyone, but it was like, oh, that supervisor seems to be the one that the Spanish speaking staff go to. This one, it's, I want to say they had different supervisors that spoke different languages, and the people that shared a language would kind of flock to any one supervisor just for simplicity, but it didn't seem to be out of like segregation or, selection. It was just kind of a natural, for sake of ease and just accessibility. But James hit on a point. No one was happy. Everyone was stressed. And the supervisor, I almost wanted to say this earlier, our supervisors also rotated very quickly out of that position. Like someone would be a supervisor and within a couple weeks, they were either gone or back to their previous job with a lot of turmoil, and they wouldn't be happy. They would kind of like vent to us USDA workers. because maybe they just felt like, oh, they're not part of the company, so they're not going to tell my boss that I'm, moaning and groaning about them. But they never had anything good to say about anyone else at the company. It was like, no one got along. So I don't think there was discrimination in that sense. I think they just were miserable across the board.
Wow. Susie, did you notice anything, any racial differences between groups or?
Well, it was not like a huge place, it was only 9 people there, but still, it was like first the boss, then the person that worked at the kill floor, then the pillars, and at the bottom, it was this person that came from another place, not from Mexico. He was at the bottom. He was like the least, like nobody cared about him. Like he's just, like quote unquote, as late to do whatever we don't want to do. And that was the ladder there, like the boss, the person on the kill floor, the pillars, and let's talking Juan, this person. And obviously was like discriminated just because he didn't speak the language.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah.
And that's so true, like anywhere, like if they don't speak the language, they can't advocate for themselves.
Exactly.
And this is a question for Keith. As someone who worked with the USDA, how aware are they of the trauma and mistreatment workers and animals face? Are they simply just allowing it to happen? And thank you all for telling your stories. They're so crucial to help to keep creating change. I work for the Farm Transition Academy, a new group working to help animal farmers and farm workers transition to plant-based agriculture. More information can be found, and the website's there, farmtransitionacademy.com. And thank you so much for that website. That's such an awesome initiative and so needed. But yeah, Keith, what do you think about, is the USDA aware of the mistreatment of animals and workers?
I have to imagine that they are at least somewhat aware of the conditions, and there just wasn't really much interest in changing that, or the in large part the rest of the USDA staff was also under the understanding that, hey, we're not here to disrupt things or be a pain in the ass for anyone, pardon my French, but it was, you only stop the line if you really have a reason to. And otherwise, business is good. We should keep this place moving. And, we're not here to be the enemy of the company. We're here to make sure that the American people and anyone else eating these products are safe and not, consuming hair or consuming, abscess, anything like that. It just wasn't a priority from my memory. And I'm sure that's, there's cases where people do advocate for the workers, but by and large, no, that was not a concern of the USDA staff.
Oh, yeah. That's the end. Does anybody have any more questions? Otherwise, I'll just close it out. But thank you all for joining today. This was super fascinating. And there's just, I think we need more of these conversations. We need to find more slaughterhouse workers who are willing to talk about these things and share their stories. So Susie put in the chat, the whistleblowerhelpline.com, reach out through there. We are currently commenting on the AVMA humane slaughter guidelines right now. We have until January 28th to send in our comments. Only AVMA veterinarians can send in their comments, but we would like to hear from you too. What do you think of these guidelines? Should they even be called humane slaughter guidelines? Because it's not humane. We all agree that slaughter isn't humane. So what are we fooling ourselves with calling it humane slaughter guidelines? And there's so many things in there that need changing. And it needs to highlight also maybe a little bit more about what workers suffer from too in these systems. And maybe you should make a statement of, ultimately the goal is to transition away from needing to slaughter animals, and reduce line speeds, talk about these line speed problems and reduce the other number of animals that we're sending through these facilities, and ultimately hoping to transition away from these methods, and raising food maybe without, or growing food without having to hurt animals, and all of these new ways we can make protein with anything from the what's it called? Precision fermentation, cultivated meat, and just plants are great too. So thank you all for joining us today. Any final thoughts, questions? Otherwise, I'll close it out. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, I wanted to mention that somebody say, how can they help? I
Oh,
think it would be great for everybody to lead by example, like if you don't like this, then live a better life and the people that is around you will follow. I have these like a few of my friends, they were not vegan, obviously, and they were not even thinking about the animals. And now because they see me doing all these things, like I constantly go to protests or organize protests or go pass food for the people that is on the street. Like it's just, everybody sees the good things that you're doing and everybody can make a difference just with a little bit of help. So definitely, I think lead by example would help a lot.
yeah, that's such a great point. Get involved with your local activist group, and you can get involved with Our Honor too, ouronor.org. And we'll have more events like this coming up. So
Absolutely. And if there are any veterinary students in your lives who you think would benefit from having a community that supports their ethics and morals and visions for a kinder world, and such that we just treat all of us and just everybody with kindness and compassion, send them over to Our Honor, and we'd be happy to provide a supportive safe space for them as well.
awesome. Great, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to the panelists. Like you all were, this is just such a great trove of information. I'm just so grateful that you've taken a stance and you're changing the world for the better. So thank you.
Yes. All
Yeah,
right.
happy to be here.
Yay. All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night,
Yeah.
everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.